we go. All right, I'll continue on going through the, I apologize to John, we're a little bit behind schedule, but we'll get caught back up quick here. So other instructions, I'm on page 19 right now, starting with PCS trips. And again, you're either going to see very small increases or you're going to see decreases through most of these lines. Some of these other lines are hard as a decrease in fuel and things like that.
I'm sorry, what is it?
This one is a decrease in fuel.
Which the line?
I'm looking at 437. Just a decrease.
Yeah, just trying to
Get it back accurate.
what the
Okay.
usage.
Yeah, so some of these decreases, I was just asking if things have been moved from lines, because I know as we've gone through this process, there have been things identified that should have been elsewhere, and we've made those corrections, but in most of these cases, it's just adjustments that John and Stuart have made for trips and things of that nature, for the fuels, when we're talking fuel.
So if I can talk about the benefits,
Yeah, go
so,
ahead.
so these are the bus drivers that drive the trips, and our workers' comp rate dropped for bus driving. So some of the decreases on the benefit lines, when there's a bus driver salary, is because we did have a good decrease on the workers' comp portion of the benefits.
Thank you. So again, fuel, lining those with actual numbers. First real big jump I see that's not a contractual one would be line 456, $960 increase. That's the increase in officials fees. And we have to pay what we have to pay to get officials for our contests. With 620 right below that, line 457 is an increase in cost of tape and all the things that they need for athletics at the middle school level. You'll see a decrease in general supplies on line 462 on the Pullman Regional High School academics. That's because the increase was from, there were some stage microphones that had to be purchased last year. So that's similar to what I shared earlier, and I can't remember what it is now, but I shared something earlier that I said would be a one-time cost and it would come out of the budget. That's an example of that. That was a one-time expense last year that has come out. High school, you get into salaries and benefits. Again, 471, high school officials get paid more than middle school officials, so your professional services is up. The contracted services is up 1,700 because of the need to recondition our football helmets and pads, as well as an increase in our athletic trainer contract. 475, general supplies. Don rotates through with uniform purchases, so that's the amount to purchase the next batch of uniforms need to be purchased, as well as additional costs for supplies. The dues and fees one is up pretty big. That's so he can attend the National Athletic Directors Conference. I was told that he's done that every other year. He's been able to do that, and I believe it was removed from last year's budget, so it's been a couple of years since he's been able to participate in that. And that brings us through that cost center. Then we get into special education. The thing with special education, you have to remember, is a lot of these things are, that just go up some of the costs, but also as students have IEPs and things get built into IEPs, we have to legally provide those services and supports. So some of these things, Joe mentioned, we have kids coming to us with IEPs that we have to make sure that we adhere to. So you're gonna see a good number of jumps there. I'll go right to the first one, 482 on page 22. You see a big jump in dues and fees because of the number of students that we have participating in swimming. We have to pay for additional pool time and the cost of an additional lifeguard. Let's do there. Instructional supplies, 2,700. That's a writing program that Joe needs. Yeah, I'm moving pretty quickly through this one because of lots of dues and fees and benefits.
Do you guys just not use textbooks at all anymore? Our textbooks are primarily used in some of our high school courses. So you'll still see books or textbooks. Sometimes it's under either of those, books or textbooks. And then we also have our math program, which does have a workbook component to it, as does our spelling program at the elementary level. Some of our textbooks are online, or there's that, a lot of our teachers use Google Classroom, so they're uploading current articles versus having just a textbook. But I'd say probably 50% of our classrooms use textbooks.
Okay. On page 24, salaries and benefits, small increases in instructional supplies. I'm all the way down to line 563. That's the writing program license, that 1,028. Same thing with line 572. The lines that really are going to jump out at you are when you get to line 604 on page 27, 604 and 610.
Yep.
These are the anticipated out-of-district placements. Out-of-district placements are extremely expensive. And if a student comes, as Joe said, and we tend to get them, with that isn't an out-of-district placement, we have to assume the cost of that. Those can run anywhere from 60, 70, 80, 90, over $100,000 for placements. I will tell you, earlier today I said, and I appreciated the administrators when I went to them and told them they had to make cuts. Joe had $103,000 more in there in anticipation of the need. So the fact, and she did talk about bringing kids back, which is the goal. But just so you'll know, her thought of what she may need next year was actually over $100,000 more than what's in there right now. So those are tuitions to private schools. Now, we had something wrong with the tuition in private school, like needs to be someone back.
So is that like Hebron Academy?
No, like Margaret Murphy,
Okay.
those types of places.
And why does that happen? I'm just curious.
Because we just don't have we can't support them. We can't-
Special services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's student needs that we can't support within the district. I will let you know that those are lines that Stacy, Joe, and we monitor those every month, because these are lines that we need to support those in terms of funds. And if we come at the end of the year and they're short, then that has to come from somewhere. So there are lines that we monitor really closely, but you don't know whether somebody might move in that has $100,000 program. And that's not unusual for an out-of-district contracted program. But we're required to meet that need.
But these are students whose families move into one of the towns. These are not like superintendent's agreement transferring from another district to our district. They're physically moving here.
Or they could be a student that just escalates to the point where we have to send them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean that they automatically, it's just because they move into our district.
Yeah, and there are our students year to year, but like Joe was saying, one could move in and all of a sudden we're 60,000 short because we have to send this. Our student who moves in is already placed in one of these because of their IEP, and we have to honor that and keep them there.
And we are trying to bring kids back. I think that's one of the points that Joe brought up too, that our middle school program is the social emotional program, is a newer program. And as soon as you start bringing kids back, because we do have 18 students that are out of district place and special schools. But we are working to bring those back, because then if you bring them back, then they automatically, like, the program pays for itself, right? Because what you would have been sending out, now you're keeping in district. But really the hard part for that is finding the right person to do that program and to provide the services that those students need. So working on building that, we hope to, our middle school program has the right people, and we hope to start bringing that also down to that social emotional learner program. Even we do have some in our elementary schools, but continue to bring it down all the way down to kindergarten.
Does this include if you have students that are just unable to come to school and they need to go to like the main virtual academy? Something like that, or is this
No,
different?
we don't have any students on main virtual academy. No.
I have a question, Todd, because you made a comment about that she felt like she could use another 100K in that line. So what is that for and why are we comfortable just
She was
not?
anticipating possibly 2 placements.
And so if we get that, what's gonna happen then? Where's
I
that
think like
100K?
Stacy just said, the money's gonna have to, and Mary said, the money will have to come from somewhere.
Right, where do we anticipate at this moment it's coming from?
And where's it been taken from before, Stacy?
So if you look at the budget printout, the fourth column over is year to date. So right now, the FY '24 budget for line 604 is $730,000. Year to date, we spent $559,000. So those were the numbers we were working from to try to have a reasonable increase on these lines. So we do feel that what is in there now is a reasonable increase.
I mean, it's always a gamble.
Yeah.
I think what Stacy's trying to say, based on the kids that we're looking at right now, these numbers seem reasonable.
Okay,
But there's always the possibility, always, no matter what we have in there, that it could be more. And so what we try to do when we, at our finance committee each month is sort of monitor where we are in those lines. So if we have to make an adjustment, it's not an emergency adjustment. We're looking back through and trying to figure out where it might come from.
okay. So to put that in layman terms, you're basically saying there's enough fluff in there right now that 100K could potentially just come from that same fund.
I don't know that there's any.
I think it's fluff, it's the best guess.
Okay,
Shot an arrow in the dark and.
that's where.
And we'll keep an eye on it, and if you notice it's not enough, because if we're looking at it and we're seeing where we are in terms of the expenditure each month, we can start to look at where could we find this if we have to. So it's about the monitoring it closely.
I refer to these every month at
I
the
was just gonna
finance
say
committee
that.
meeting as Mary's lines,
Mary's line.
because she does monitor these very well.
Now, if you go to the special ed director's office on page 28, there are a couple jumps there, purchase services, 2,400. That's just increase in electricity, shredding, they pay, I didn't realize this till I was talking about it, they pay something to the cost of central office, that central office incurs, so that's increases that we experienced there, they contribute to. And then the postage rates, they told me it's the postage stamps and things have gone up
again.
several times in the last year. So there's an increase there.
And special education also has some very strict restrictions around notification of parents, and so the postage line is sort of, it just is what it is. Yeah.
So what about, because I used to work for an insurance company many lifetimes ago, where they had their own machine that do we have that? Because they were like given a discounted rate because, so that's what we use and it's still going up?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You'll see a big jump on line 630, and the dues and fees. That is for our assistant director to get some course conferences under her belt. New to the business, we have both a new director, as Joe said, and a new assistant director. But another big component of that is safety care training, which is very important. We have a good number of staff safety care trained. That is so that if you have to put hands on a student.
Yeah,
my
daughter works in Margaret.
So it doesn't put ourselves, they've been trained to properly do that, so we're not putting ourselves in a potential liability situation.
Or an injury.
Or an injury.
Right.
So the more that, to the student or the staff. So the more people that we have as trained trainers, but also the more training we can provide for safety care.
And
the
also, they are trained in de-escalation too,
Correct.
so it doesn't get to that.
Right.
Get to that point, yeah. And does that last forever, or is that like CPR where you gotta go every 2
You
years?
gotta
and
keep
renew
getting
it?
recertified.
You do, okay.
It changes. Some of the things have changed.
At Margaret Murphy, my daughter's a special ed teacher there, and they have to do it yearly.
Really?
And again, the rest of that is minor, if there are any, and that's retirement benefits, psychological retirement benefits, social workers retirement benefits. You'll see a $1,000 increase on line 671, that's.
Can we back up?
Yep.
I have a
question on line 644.
644.
Okay, so we budgeted last year 40,000 for this contracted services, and we've used $168, and yet we're going to budget another 40 again, so what's that huge amount
Yep, I
for?
can explain that. We have what's called main care. So students that qualify for services, main care pays a portion of their services and we have to pay a portion. The state withholds our subsidy at a certain time during the year to cover these. So the portion we have to pay, we don't actually cut a check, it's taken out of our subsidy. So I have to go in and look at how much they've taken out and then allocate it to what those services were. And then post it, which I have not done yet this year because they just sent us notice that they're going to be taking it out of our April subsidy. So when I get that dollar amount, I have to credit the subsidy as if we got it. That's my credit. My debit is charging what the services the student received. So there's 40,000 there. You'll see as you go in these next couple of sections, those big amounts is 14,000 under social work. That's when those lines get charged. So that's why you don't see anything yet, because the state has not made that adjustment yet. So I don't know what they've withheld from our subsidy.
I guess my question though is looking at 23 actuals, it was 10% of, or 1% of that 40,000, it was a very small amount, so just the budgeted amount of 40,000 is really my question, versus actuals of 2023 that was only less than $4,000.
Yeah.
So are we raising more money in that line item than we truly need?
We'd have to check with Jill. I can just explain when that gets charged, but as far as what her needs are, she would have to.
Because we could give John $50,000 more in the CIP fund.
No, we wanna look at the needs of the
Academics.
first.
Which line?
Instruction. No auctioning off these stuff.
I'm looking at 644 and 652, so you've got,
You're my yin,
Yeah.
my yang, right?
and again, I just, that it's such a huge amount that we haven't
No.
used.
And I will, this is one of those, I'll have to get back to the group and I can follow up with Joe and get,
And the same is true for line 652.
yes.
Yeah, at least I looked back at our fiscal year 24 budget presentation from our special ed director, and both lines do go up to, because I was like wondering, I'm like, was it just a zero? Did we accidentally add in a zero from 4,000 to 40,000? But it does say in there that it was reflecting true cost of out of district, but I also see what you're saying too.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So-
thank you for.
No?
Yeah.
I'm fine with that too. Should we vote
Oh,
it?
yeah, there's a whole bunch of those.
I know.
Yeah, well, the other ones aren't, there are, but the other ones aren't as bad, 2,000, okay, I can live with that, right? Even though there wasn't anything expended, because you, like you said, you have to plan for something, but when you're talking 40,000 versus 4, that's a huge amount.
Or 14,000 versus $800.
Yeah, and there's 691 as well, although that
Is
one's
it
not.
maybe because a student went from elementary school to high school? Because in 22-23 there was a $40,000 contracted service on line 691.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was K through 8, and then it goes, and now we're looking at, oh no, that's,
Yeah.
No,
it
you're down to 14.
would be
but
the,
then K through,
it would be out of district services that we're providing for, so we're contracting with. So if a student needed speech and language and they were a Margaret Murphy student, then we would be paying for that speech and language teacher through that line. But yes.
And it is still K 8, 9, 12, like you said.
yeah, it is still okay, yeah. So, no need to guess, we'll just ask.
We'll follow up on that.
Thank you.
I think I said, it said 671 and also it's 678, those two lines, those are computerized versions of tests that we have, but this one is that grade 2. Same thing with 693. Under 716, it's an updated evaluation tool for general supplies for K-8 OT.
What line was that again?
716.
Okay, got it.
The increase on 721, 9 to 12 OT is, two things contribute to that. It's an increase in student numbers, but it's also students remaining longer. Special ed students can now remain in the public school setting until they're 22 years of age. So that means additional expenses for those students staying longer. School year, all salaries and benefits, retirement. Pretty much that brings us up to transportation. John, were you gonna go through the transportation or you want me to? Yo, you,
No,
I will, okay. So that brings, that cost center closes out. So now we're at transportation, page 34. And those first several lines are all contracted services. All contractually obligated until you get to the contracted services, 7060. We have change in mechanics. With that, we're getting an increased preventive maintenance stuff. So the contracted services, because we're taking care of things the way we should take care of them, we're seeing a decrease in the need to send those vehicles out. We have some very good people working on our vehicles. And when John called me and said, we got 13 buses, and you said it was July, I thought it was even later than that. I thought it was like right before the start of the school year.
It was towards the end of July.
Yeah, early on.
So when he called me and said 13 buses off the road, we were like, whoa. But they're doing a great, the guys we have now are doing awesome.
I know, it was mentioned that there's homeless kid, that's really unfortunate,
Yep.
that's sad. But it says homeless out of district, what does that mean exactly?
We have to transport. So if a student, let's say, I'll take my hometown of Freeport. Let's say we have a student who's homeless living in Freeport, but who's attending schools in Poland. We would have to pay half the cost of transporting the student from Freeport to Poland. And Freeport would have to pick up the other half.
But that's only for whatever the school season is left, correct?
yes.
Yes.
It's the first year they become homeless.
Yep. So,
So they were an existing student that became homeless, that
Correct.
you're still supporting.
correct. 761, you're gonna see a lot of this, and I think John will probably mention some of these as well. The repairs and maintenance of equipment, that 26,000 is actually a reflection of historical spending. So it's more accurate of what we've actually been spending over the years. The decrease of 9,321 on line 762 is a retired lease.
If that's for bus dispatch, does that pick up somewhere else?
No.
We're doing our own.
We were sharing that with the town of Poland. It was a 20-year bond that built the facility across the way where the fire station is and stuff, and that is now paid off.
So it's paid off.
Yes,
I think that $84 below it is rent.
right, so the line under,
Yeah.
the line underneath it, we help maintain the building, so that's our portion of that.
Insurance is contractual, communications, obviously that decreased. The PD travel that you see on the line 767 is new driver training. We've already talked about our shortages, so this is the opportunity to try to provide drivers with the training they need so we can have drivers and keep them. Supplies, you see a big jump in that line. That again reflects the historical spending average for parts and repairs. And John, I think it was you were telling me about tires at one point, the astronomical cost for tires. But again, this budget is more reflective of what the actual costs have been. So you won't see, I'm assuming, you won't see such a big jump as we move forward because now we have the baseline where it should be. Utility controlled increase. Fuel consumption, here again, that reflects the actual consumption history.
Utilities, sorry, real quick, 769, what are we paying for?
That, like Todd mentioned, the special ed contributes to the building, to the central office building that they're housed in. This department is also housed in there, so it helps with the electricity costs, toilet paper, those types of things.
What building?
Central
Central
office.
office.
Oh, okay,
The
oh, yeah.
director's located.
Okay,
Yep.
I thought this was the gas garage that we were paying a on top of the lease.
No, no,
Okay.
that's them paying for the privilege of being a. Fleet fuel, again, I may have already said that one, but that's an actual consumption history.
Now, are you able to pre-buy contractually?
We actually purchase our fuel through the town of Poland. So they bid it out, we just purchase from them.
So you haven't done your own?
Well, we don't have a way to store any fuel, so
They have the pump
Yeah.
station.
Yeah, I understand that. But what about heating fuel too?
heating fuel is bid out.
Okay.
But that's not necessarily in transportation. The heating fuel falls under operations.
Have we looked into like checking local stations that might do that instead of going through Poland?
So we have found that the towns, because they buy in bulk, get a decent rate as it is, and then they sell it to us just at cost with a slight markup to cover the costs of, the utility and the maintenance of the equipment.
Yeah,
And plus, we don't have to deal with any tax issues.
okay.
If we went through a private, let's say Dad's Place or Cumberland Farms, we had a contract with them, then we'd be chasing tax. So we don't have to do that.
Yeah, when we were Union 29, I used to have to bill for a refund of the federal fuel tax,
Really? Yeah,
and that was a pain.
yeah, I bet,
Yeah.
yeah.
773 and 774 are first-year payments on a bus and a van. The purchase transportation for special ed, again, is closer. It's more in alignment with the actual expenditure. I think this might have been what you were asking about the homeless out of the district. This is what we talked about a few minutes ago.
I
And
know
that
this is like an obvious question, but there's stuff in place to like confirm that they're homeless and all of that.
Yes, Jen Rose is our McKinney-Vento,
Yep.
and she does the whole intake process.
Okay.
Yep, that follows our policy.
This is kind of a general question. I'm sure, John, you've looked into this, but earlier Stuart was talking about how there's 2 buses that are sitting because they need to be fixed. And I was just wondering if the lack of buses ever affects our transportation or if it's just the lack of vans and drivers.
So it puts us at a disadvantage because those 2 buses that are sidelined right now are our spare. So when we have a frontline bus go down, that does create an issue for us, but we make it work. One of the buses needs a transmission that's gonna be close to $20,000 to replace. And we're out of funds, so
Yeah. I just wondered if you've looked into like expanding our van program and like decreasing our buses.
So we don't have an exorbitant amount of buses, and the state really monitors how many buses a school district should have because they're partially funded by the state. So they tell us when we can purchase buses and when we should be retiring them. And then, of course, we're allowed to keep some for spares, but that's highly regulated by the state, not necessarily, because I'd love to have, 6 buses sitting on the sideline, but we'd have to pay for those 100% out of pocket if we want to do that.
I just wondered if it would be like cost effective to look into using more vans because more people can drive vans and they're inexpensive to fix and like scale back the number of buses that we have, but I didn't realize it was so regulated. So, of course.
The state doesn't purchase vans, though. We have to purchase those outright for whatever we need. And we could use more vehicles for people who don't have commercial driver's licenses to move people around. We run into that on a daily basis.
And just the other day, we couldn't send the math team, right? Because
Yeah, the math team was supposed to go to a meet someplace and we didn't have a driver. And actually, I don't even think we had a van that day.
Okay, so that brings me to John's operations, facilities and maintenance center. Oh, I got one more slide, John, sorry. Amy keeps talking about the staff, the instruction piece. There you see the impact. I need to read the slide to you, but
Amy, wasn't the math and science added last year? Wasn't that one that we had added last year
No.
as a new?
It's been 2 years unfilled, so
Okay,
it's 2 years.
There was two.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
And again, this is where I was saying, just because we couldn't fill them, doesn't mean we don't need them. But we knew the situation we were in budget-wise, and trying to be as responsible as we could and bring a budget that, for consideration, these were some of the decisions that were made. And any of those things you see, the relocation to ESSER, if I just have to remind you as well, those funds are going away.
Right, and, one of the things that we heard this morning from our administrators was they talked about SEL, about the social emotional learning. And those three, at least two of those positions, were part of that program, that now, I think we talked about it the other night at our board meeting, we're gonna be able to continue with the BAR program, which those first two positions strongly supported, but the needs of the kids are still there. We're just not gonna have the level of support for them that we have had in the past. So, I think yes, we can not fund those positions, but the need hasn't gone away. It's still there.
I have a question with the substance abuse counselor position. Is there some way to maybe get funds for a resource officer that would have that rolled into it and get federal funding for that?
We have a school resource officer currently. We have a very, very good school resource officer. But she is on the go all the time, just dealing with, we heard about the truancy and and absenteeism, things of that nature, providing student support. I'll go up to the high school and she's in there counseling kids. So it's, to expect her to pick up an instructional component like that, I think would be unrealistic.
No, I'm saying an additional one.
Well, if we were gonna do an additional SRO, then I would look to be able to looking at just hiring, keeping our substance abuse educator that we have. Cause I think there's that part too of like, if you look at, we do have a social worker at the high school who can provide substance abuse, because if there's any infractions of code of conduct at the middle school, high school, part of that is to meet with the substance abuse counselor in order to make sure that there's a plan in place and help providing all of the supports. But there is a person who can do that piece, but if we were looking at that, then I would advocate for just maintaining the people that we have that are filling those positions currently right now, or
But
morphing
those
the unfilled
positions couldn't
into.
get federal dollars because of what's been going on with these shootings and things. There is funding, it hasn't, should be shortly coming available for schools to be able to get more resource officers in their districts. Is that something you guys have considered or would consider?
We take advantage of every single grant that is out there. So absolutely, like the state of Maine has been looking at a lot of literacy grants, preventing homeless grants, where Jenny and I are applying for a McKinney-Vento to offset transportation costs. So whatever there's out there for grants, we are taking advantage of them. So yes, if
Because
there's
it's
grant
federal,
funds,
it's
I'll
not
chase
state,
them.
it's federal dollars, the federal funding.
So off the top of your head, Amy, do you know these ESSER positions that are not rolling over? What are the numbers on those? Like their salary? Do you know that?
It's 188 for the two, or all 2.4.
Yeah, because one of them was over 100,000.
Yeah. Yeah, 180. Yeah, I think it's 188 if I remember correctly.
So that little gray box is 188K.
And that's the example of when I told administrators, don't bring new positions, even though they're positions that would appear new in the local budget, that amount you just threw out, 188, they're not new. We've had them, they just weren't in the local budget. But so it would look like a new position, it would be, it would look like it would be a new position in the local budget. All right, well, relinquish to John. I don't know if you want to try to make that. We can make that larger.
It's in the packet.
It's in the packet, yeah, you're probably best to look at the CIP in your packet.
You know what page that's on?
Page 27.
He's looking at it.
27.
operations and CIP.
Are we doing CIP or we going over?
Well, CIP is next on the slide. If you want to jump to operations, I can come back to the CIP. I'll go to operations. How about operations?
That's fine. So before we jump into the numbers, a couple of things that I'd like you to be aware of. Like I said earlier, when I came back to the district and I talked about the challenges that RSU 16 faces in the last year, I really had to take a hard look at how we have funded our operations programs. It was long overdue that we had a professional engineering firm come in and do a full-scale assessment of all of our properties to better align our CIP program moving forward. The last time we had it done in the district was 2011 with the company. Their acronym is VFA. I wasn't here. I don't know what that stands for. In the summer of this year, we had another firm, AEI, come in and essentially go room to room in all of our buildings and create a very detailed report of the condition of our buildings. And it just covered just the buildings. It doesn't cover furniture, it doesn't cover vehicles, those types of things. And once they had generated that report for us, the first thing I did is I went through and I modified the CIP plan for the next 10 years using their recommendations for schedules of replacement of items. And generally, things that make the CIP list are of $5,000 or more, or have a life expectancy of greater than 5 years. Anything else that was in that report that was under isn't something that just gets tossed away. It certainly has to be dealt with, but it ended up going into the operations, maintenance budget. So as we go through the budget, what I tried to do was look at the trending the spending trend over the last several years. And what is blatantly obvious is that we have severely underfunded the operations of this district for a long time. And so when you see some significant jumps in the numbers, it reflects both the need to bring those numbers in alignment with today's expenses and some of those items that didn't make the CIP list but had to go back into the maintenance. So that's just kind of important to keep in mind. My budget's just like all of the other budgets. There are some lines that I don't have any control over that are contractually obligated. The salaries and benefits lines, our utility lines. I'll tell you why there's been some jumps in some of those numbers, but I don't have any control over those. But as we go through these, I will certainly, answer any of your questions as we go along. So starting with Poland Community School. You can see the first couple of lines there. Those are contractually obligated. Our contracted services. So one of the other things that we had to take a hard look at here in the district is that because we were underfunding our budgets, our maintenance staff was taking on a lot of repairs and maintenance items that they weren't necessarily qualified to do. And although their best interests, were to save the district money, what we're finding now is some of those are now actually costing us money because we're having to go back and undo what was done and now have it redone. And that, of course, is you've paid twice for some of those things. So initially there might have been some cost savings by having our own staff do that, but having to do it now by a professional contractor, of course, usually compounds that expense. One thing we have to keep in mind is that the pay scales that we have for our custodians are not enough to attract people that have specialized experience or degrees in HVAC or plumbing or electricity or those types of things. And although they have tackled some of these things in the past that they shouldn't have, that practice stopped this year. So, we can't afford not to do things right the first time. And so that's why the operations budget is taking such a hit this year, is because we actually had to take a hard stand on how we're going to do things moving forward. And that, will reflect in this budget. So under contracted services, you'll see, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but, $6,700. Most of that is because of, all the things that we have to hire contractors to come in and do for us. And some of those costs, because we're moving them out of our repairs and maintenance lines, those costs actually get shifted to the contracted services line. Repairs to maintenance and grounds and repairs to maintenance and buildings. Again, these are things that we have underfunded that, you know, we are putting more money into to try to get back onto a better track of, you know, a more consistent and appropriate maintenance program.
So John, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So like in looking at that line 784, do you have a specific project in mind that you're going to use that particular funds for this year? That's not part of your CIP, or is that kind of?
He does.
Okay, that's, and I'm assuming it would be yes to each building as you're going through.
Yeah, so specifically with Poland Community, yes, we have to make some upgrades to our alarm systems. The bleachers in our buildings used to have preventative maintenance contracts. Those were canceled several years ago. Those are being put back in. We have to do a classroom reconfiguration. Well, actually, this may change. We had planned for a classroom reconfiguration because of an additional pre-K teacher that was supposed to be hired at PCS, but I don't think that's happening now. Is that correct?
No.
So that classroom reconfiguration probably won't take place now. Doors. You're going to find that the vast majority of our exterior doors in all of our buildings need repair. The doors actually either need replacement or they need hardware replacement. Lighting upgrades is actually a small number for us because, as you can see, during COVID, one of the projects that was funded with, was it ESSER money, or what paid for all the lighting?
That was part of the Siemens energy reduction.
Yeah, the energy efficiency program. So every light fixture in the school district is brand new. So we do occasionally have one go down, but they're not overly expensive to replace. Flooring replacements. A lot of the VCT tile that we have in a lot of our schools are original, you know, to the 50s and the 70s, and no asbestos. That's a bad word. Well, we don't say that. No, we only have one school that has a very small amount of asbestos in it, and it's in the boiler room here at Elm Street. Yeah, no, don't say that. So yes, the VCT tile that is on the floors no longer contains asbestos, but they do wear out over time, and so those have to be replaced. The gym equipment. So all those wind-up devices that move the basketball hoops up and down, you know, a lot of those are originals to, you know, like here at Elm Street, the original to the addition back in 1984 and at PCS a couple years before. Those have reached the end of their useful life, and in some cases now are safety hazards for those that are having to be, that are using them. So those have to be replaced. Should I go on?
No, yeah, I'm good, I'm good.
Okay, because I can keep
You've
going.
already maxed your $78,000.
Okay. Electricity, just to briefly, I don't have any control over insurance or communications, but electricity. So why there is such a drastic number in electricity? So up until November of this past year, we were locked into a 3-year power purchase agreement at 6 cents per kilowatt. And when that agreement expired, I had to renegotiate and find a new one. The best one I could find for the current year that we're in is at 10 cents per kilowatt. So you remember me earlier saying that, you know, we use over $1 million a kilowatt. Well, when you start adding 4 cents to 1 million, you know, kilowatts used in the district, it adds up pretty quickly. I think the high school alone uses, you know, 350,000 of those, you know, of that power. Heating fuel, of course, that's a bid cost. Fuel is slightly up. The one advantage we do have, well, I'd like to say is an advantage, heating fuel for us so far this year has been down. And the good thing about that is when you look at my expended lines to date, you'll see that a lot of them are overexpended. The benefit of not having to spend so much on heating fuel is that will help to offset some of the overages on some of those other lines. And then the lease conversion principle, that's something we're locked into as well. We switch over to Elm Street, and all of the schools are going to be the same. If you have specific questions about any increase, I'd be happy to address those, but Emily?
I'm just wondering why not all of the schools have the contracted services increase?
It depended on what was gonna be needed in the school.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And some of it was, so you may not see it this year, but when some of those maintenance items were done in the assessment, it may not have been slated for next year. So next year when we come around, you might see higher increases for Minot School versus some of the other schools.
Makes sense.
John Paula has a question.
Paula?
Jess had shown up at one of our council meetings a couple of months ago and talked about a retaining wall here at the school that needed repair.
Yes,
Mr. Lavoy offered his services.
yes.
Have you made contact and has an agreement been made?
We haven't reached an agreement, but we have had a discussion.
Okay. Is that, in case that falls through, is that included in your potential budget for next year if we as a district have to pay for that?
So if I have to pay for it, it is included in this year's CIP budget, the
Okay.
current year that we're in. So that was a project that was slated for this spring. The plan is to get it done this spring, but the funding is already there at the full cost if I have to hire a contractor to do it.
Okay,
But my conversation with Ray has been pretty positive. I think he's, gonna be very helpful, so
good,
I'm not so concerned about that one.
okay.
Which is a
Just wanted
good
to make
example of our towns and our communities and our schools working together, which is what we want to see.
Anything else with any of the other schools, or are we good?
Under PRHS, what's professional services security?
That is our share of the expense for the school resource officer.
Okay, and that's the same for the under Whittier.
The other question I had is I noticed that there's a water bill on some schools and not on others. Are some on Wells still?
So all of the schools are on public water supplies. So PCS, the high school, middle school, and Elm Street are covered by Mechanic Falls Water Department. At Minot School, it is covered by a well that is unofficially the town of Minot Water Department.
It's
But we
the
still-
only part of the water.
Yeah. We still get a bill from them, but it may not have necessarily breached the $1,000, plus or minus marker. Yeah, see, there is a $2,000 increase for Minot for water. Yeah, it's in there.
Well, I noticed it there and I noticed it on the high school, but I didn't notice it on any of the others, so that's why I was curious.
It just didn't reach that 1,000. The one that you're looking through here on like page 29 in the booklet, that one only reflects the cost increase of $1,000 or more. If you go
Okay.
back to the financial here, this document,
Okay,
you'll see water under each one of those.
So real quick, so the line 846 and then line 866, that's talking about the school resource officer, you said, the professional services security.
Yes.
Why is that on there twice with two different amounts? So the total is like 150K.
So a lot of the expenses between the high school and the middle school are shared. So it's, the SRO is specifically assigned to the high school, middle school, so they split the cost, but it's a 70-30 split, is that roughly?
You pay for the salary, benefits, and the vehicle.
In the vehicle, yeah.
Okay.
Because you can tell
All
it
right,
on the
that's-
Androscoggin County budget.
Yeah.
That
That's what I
comes
was
up every
wondering.
year.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
It's a
okay.
wash, it's a wash, yeah.
Okay.
It's funny money being transferred back and forth from them.
on CIP.
Are we good?
Now, on the water, I noticed that there's a decrease in a lot of the lines. Is that because water rates went down?
No, it was based on consumption,
Okay.
so historic consumption.
This is when I started off saying John could have 2 million wells, he would. You see that bottom right number right there, without any cuts to the CIP, he would have been over, he would have been over, he would have been over 2
Page
million
3940.
So
Yeah.
he's come down considerably to the 600,000 that I requested him to do.
Now, do we pre-buy or do we just put it out to bid and hope somebody gives us a really good price
For,
for the like, heating fuel?
we bid it out every year, usually in August, and we don't pre-buy. It's just whoever comes in with the least cost per gallon.
We have the ability to pre-buy if we get a really good deal.
None of the people that have bid have made that offer to us.
Interesting.
I can get you good deals on generators if you need it.
Wow, I can connect you with somebody in this room that might be able to help you out.
Let me know. He's at home with the dog.
You didn't hear the dog story, you don't want it.
You don't want to know the dog story, yeah.
All right, so we ready to go into CIP?
Yeah.
So, again, CIP, this budget has caused me to lay awake and stare at the ceiling many, many nights. And for good reason. We here at the school district have been our own worst enemy. We have known year after year roughly what we need to, fund our CIP budget. And in some cases, we have, we've always budgeted for CIP, but it's never been to the total amount that, we believe that we needed. And then in some years, we didn't even expend, for various reasons, what was approved in the CIP budget. And I can tell you that when I was here previously, one of those reasons that didn't get expended, it was the budget may have gotten frozen at a certain point in the year, and, those funds just didn't get used up in time. So this budget here, as you can see in the very bottom right-hand corner over there, there's a $2 million figure. That's where I started. And that number is based on all the information that was remaining from the VFA assessment of 2011, the new AEI assessment that was done this year, and then any staff requests that were not in either of those reports. You guys, so in the column way over on the left, it tells you where the request came from. Then you see the location of where the improvement's gonna be made, the project that is slated, and then the cost. And you can see that there's a lot of strikeouts. And for various reasons, you'll see in my notes column, some of these were duplicates within the same year. Some of them were moved to the maintenance budget, as indicated by the letter M. The ESSR code, those are projects that were funded or are in the process of being funded with ESSER funds. And then anywhere where you see the D and then the fiscal year, those are projects that, of course, have been bumped. Unfortunately, when you don't fix things on your CIP, they don't just magically disappear. They end up getting put off to a future year. And we have been doing that, consistently year after year. And unfortunately, what happens is you get to a point where, these things just compound to this great massive list. And when you look at our 10-year plan, if you were to look at the 10-year CIP plan now, it would just rock your world because, for example, next year, if I presented you with the budget proposal for next year, it is already at $8 million. Obviously, we're not going to present that, but when you look at when things were slated for replacement and then things that get bumped to the next year, we're at that point. And naturally, those things are going to get kicked to a future year, but they don't ever go away. These are still things that have to be replaced. Todd, do you have that slide with the bar chart?
I do. I got it right up in front of me right now. You want me to share it?
Yeah, please. So when we talked about, us being our own worst enemy, this is what I refer to. When you go back, to 2016, the column in blue is the amount of money that we technically should have had budgeted for that particular year. The green amount is the amount that was actually approved and funded for that budget year. And then the amounts in red are what was actually expended for CIP items. And you can see there's quite a disparity from what we actually needed to what we actually spent. So, like I said, for various reasons, those monies weren't expended. But I can assure you that for as long as I'm here, those monies from year to year are gonna get spent because we just have too many things on our list that we can't keep putting off. It might have been a luxury 10 years ago, but we can't anymore. As I mentioned earlier, some sections of our buildings are 1950s, that's original plumbing. And some of this, and the primary reason for the HVAC project is in, like this room here, that unit sitting right there at that window was original to this building in 1950s. And the plumbing that's in there is, over time, is eating itself from the inside out. At PCS, we have leaking pipes in the ceiling all the time, and when the plumber comes in and takes them apart and you look at just how thin and brittle these pipes are, we're just that much closer to some significant problems in our schools. And so this HVAC project couldn't have come at a better time because we need that injection, that financial injection into the school districts to take care of some of these problems that we've just kind of been kicking the can down the road. So, I hate to ask people for money. I hate to see my personal tax bill go up, but I also understand the reality is that, we just haven't taken care of it. It's not going away. So as we go down through, if we go back to that other slide of the CIP,
Hold on.
I tend to put a lot of colors into my working documents only because it's easy for me to understand, but not everybody understands my colors. So that's why I printed you a black and white one. And essentially that's fine. Essentially, it says the same thing as you saw up there. When we originally started looking at the need for this year, it did come up over 2 million. And then I realized that, absolutely 2 million is just not going to be acceptable, especially considering we're looking at borrowing, almost $10 million. You can only go to the well so many times. And so I had brought it down to $1 million. And then
Some of our money.
Special delivery.
I had cut it down to $1 million, thinking that was kind of a more reasonable place to be, still knowing that, there was the potential that there were going to be cuts to that. And then at Todd's request, he suggested that we get it down to 600,000 and try to shoot for a 600,000, line for the next several years. And in theory, if we kept it at 600,000 for the next 10, we will be dumping 6 million into our buildings. But according to the AEI and the VFA reports, if we were to fix everything in their reports, we really should be expending closer to 12, 13, or 14 million dollars. So even over 10 years, we might spend 6 million, but we're still only going to be halfway there.
I think just adding on to that too, like with the CIP, John went through, we also talked about the ESSER funds. So we are putting $357,000 of ESSER funds towards that. So while it looks like the number in our local budget is $600,000, actually we'll have $957,000 to spend. So I think that's an important piece to look at. That gets us closer to that $1 million number that you were.
And the 55,000 that's going to carry over that was approved at last year's budget, but wasn't approved to expend. So this year there'll be is it a separate line or is it a total line?
It's two separate articles, warrant articles.
Yeah. So we just have to have authorization to, the money's been raised and it's sitting there, but nobody gave us permission to spend it, so.
And it could be more. I mean, the least it'll be is 55,000.
Right.
But if you don't
How did
spend,
Yeah.
that happen?
Just money that wasn't expended. So, I don't know specifically about the 55,000, but if I don't spend all of the CIP money, that can get reallocated into next year's budget.
But you're not gonna let that happen anymore, are you?
So, yeah, I'd like to say absolutely not. I can tell you we will get it pretty close. But what we find, especially this time of year, as we try to get projects done, we're at the mercy of contractors and we're at the mercy of supply chain. So we try to get these things done by the end of the year, but it may not happen. I'd like to get it done and ordered, that way the financials still hit this year. But sometimes it just doesn't work out that way.
And that's the beauty of the CIP, it's a designated fund, so it does roll over.
Right. Is there anything on the CIP you have questions about?
Do you wanna just talk about how the HVAC projects appear in here? Because there is a line here that says boilers.
Yeah, so there was a line, I think it was 39,000 at Elm Street, that has already been taken out. It was one of the cuts. So the other things that, I don't think there's any other HVAC stuff in this particular budget. You will see at Elm Street, the gas monitor heaters. So those are the primary heating units for that addition, the modular addition down there. They are not connected to the boiler system. So those are standalone heating units that I still have to cover that are not part of the HVAC project. And what you'll see in future CIPs is that there are planned replacement for boilers at the other schools and ventilation equipment at the other schools. Those will get pulled out as those projects get done. I'm not gonna go through and pull them out now. I will wait until they're done, and then when we don't need that money, we won't be asking for it.
On a level of urgency, John, where would you put the majority of this stuff?
So at this point, because I had to pull so much out of it, these are things that really absolutely should be done in the next year. When you look at PCS, if we don't do the exterior masonry repointing, that doesn't necessarily mean the bricks are gonna fall off the side of the off the side of the building in the next year. But we have places where, you know, the mortar has now deteriorated to the point where we have moisture leakage. And so what you might not see is the wall falling down, but it's the damage that you don't see that needs to be taken care of. You know, we have building envelopes that really need to be sealed up, and we just haven't been really good about taking care of things like that.
But we are now, because you're back, right?
No, we're working on
Yeah,
it. Trust me,
Awesome.
we're working on it. But it's gonna cost, you know,
Yes.
it's,
Would it be realistic if we're gonna hit these 4 people, that we go get a bond and get a bond for all of it that needs to be done and just get it over with?
so the problem with doing that is the amount of work on the CIP list can't be done all in 1 year. It can't all be done in 2 years. There just aren't enough contractors, you know.
Well, I
to-
understand that, but with this rolling thing that you talked about, where we can.
Revolving renovation, the
Yes,
school revolving,
could all of this stuff
What do you
be
mean the
under
master lease
that?
purchase?
on that lease purchase, yeah.
Which we can only use for
It can only be
Energy.
used for energy,
Energy.
right? So what I'm saying
Masonry's
is,
not considered, and roofs aren't considered any.
So would windows fall under
Yeah.
that? That's probably the only thing would be.
they might,
windows. That would-
you know, we'd have to look at, you know, the how they define, you know, energy projects. I think you could probably stretch the argument that they should be included. But the problem with bonding all at once now is we're gonna be paying a lot of interest on a bond for projects that probably won't even start for, you know, a couple of years down the road. So you're throwing good money away. The hope is that we're gonna reapply for the SRF fund next year. And if we get approved, which we had a rock solid case for mine at school this year, we didn't get funded for. But if we get approved, the nice thing is we will not have taken the money out of those, lease purchase agreement yet. So we can use the SRF funding, pay our 40%, the state funds the other 60%, and then we don't even ever have to touch that money. So there's a chance that we may not even use the full 10 million. I mean, I'd like to say that we make a pretty good argument, but we don't score the applications.
I see that you have a lot of asphalt repairs in there.
Yes,
I'm assuming you've gone out to bid, or you under existing contract for the rates for the
so
asphalt?
right now, the asphalt work that you see that's covered by ESSER funds at PCS, those are currently out for bid. So the goal is to have that paving done over the summer.
It's so badly needed.
PCS is in rough shape.
It is.
It actually, I was hoping that we were gonna be able to get away with an overlay there, but when we started exploring it, the the base pavement is so shot that that whole front parking lot has to come out and has to be redone from scratch.
I'm curious what you'll get back, and I'm wondering if there's any collaboration that can be done with the town, because obviously the town contracts and has, we constantly resurfacing roads in town, and I think we get a pretty good rate, so I'm just curious.
I could reach out to them and ask to piggyback on their bids. I don't know if the towns, they don't necessarily pave every year, so, it would have to be,
Mechanic Falls is this year.
they
Yeah,
are.
we're paving
Yeah.
some roads this year, we
Okay.
just renewed.
Yeah, Mechanic Falls is the Davis project.
Okay, yeah, I'll reach out to Vic.
I'm gonna set for 2025.
That's what, well, we were just, I think maybe. If anything's worse than the parking lot, IPCS is my road. I know it's in our packet somewhere, but I remember these things.
Anything else for John, CIP? Now move on to our next one. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John, we appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think we've hit on this a bunch of times today, but this is the next slide that I have is just the note that, it's separate, and I think we made that clear. I think we've said that time and time again, and the benefits of the master lease purchase is the fact that we may not have to utilize all the funds. John's right, we were so agitated when we got the results back for the revolving renovation, but we will continue to apply for that. We'll look at the applications that were approved that we got our hands on, and we'll see if we have to make any adjustments to ours moving forward. So we'll continue to work on that, but that is completely separate from.
I think the other thing that we need to make clear is it's also completely separate from the small project that we're talking about,
Yep.
the ADA project,
Yep.
so that people have an understanding that that's not what we're asking for this year, that it's only the ADA, it's not this.
And that's a nice segue, Mary, not what we're asking for, because Amy had mentioned a list of a whole laundry list of stuff, and I'm gonna bring that list up now and let her speak to that.
I have just one quick question on the HVAC. So I know that, we're gonna be asking for funds on a project by project basis. So when we have, say, all three schools, we're paying the loans, what's the expected annual increase when all three, if you utilize all those funds? What's the maximum payment amount on an annual basis, or what you'd expect that increase to be? Do you know that?
So that 609,000 we were talking about during the break, that is the amortization on all three projects if they were bonded. So if they're sold at different times and you get to the point where now all three projects have been done, hopefully the first few we've had done would be paid down a couple of years, so the amount would be less, but it would be around that ballpark.
All right,
When do we plan on asking to get permission to do the lease? Or is the,
It's a done deal.
you
It's
just
done.
have the ability to do it, it's done?
There's a referendum line item on the vote though to move forward with it, right? I thought there was.
That's
does
for
the
SRO,
ADA,
the
the
ADA
school
one.
revolving renovation.
Oh, okay.
All right, so the last page here is on page 42 in your budget booklet. And this is what's not in the budget. And typically during the budget process, as administrators, principals, directors, we talk about our needs and wants, and our needs and wants are grounded in data that supports that. It's not something that we're just bringing forward extra fluff or extra goodies, but really what is in our buildings are we seeing that we need? And we do chase after grants. We have a literacy grant right now. We have a preventing homeless grant. We always apply for our Title I grant, which includes Title I, Title II, Title IV, and Title V. So we have funding, but these are positions and items that are not in the budget, that have been expressed by one of our administrators or directors or principals that there's a need for. And so there is one thing that I hear the word, the kick the can down the road, and I just want to make sure that we run that saying parallel to the academic side. Because I always say John and I are a great balance because he brings the operation side, and my passion is the teaching and learning side. And as long as I'm here and he's there, we'll be continuing to provide that balance between the two. But I also start to think about that we're not bringing forward any new positions this year. And how that feels as though, if we think about kicking the can operations wise, that's delaying, deferring, postponing, neglecting, or ignoring. We're also now starting down that same path. Needs are. So I just want to make sure that we're aware of that as we start moving in that direction. This list, I am fully aware that we're not bringing forward any new positions, but I do want to make sure that if we could tell our future selves, if we come back, if we need to come back in time to this moment, these are things that are definitely needed in our buildings and in our schools. And it falls under different pieces. I look at those and there's student supports and specialized instruction from the ELL teacher, that's our English language learners, to interventionists, to behavior deans, to math science interventionists, to counselors. Those are all things that are needed for our students. And then also the quality of experiences, from having a late bus to having maker spaces, which are big STEM and all of those components. There's all of those pieces on there, as well as those operation pieces that are out of John's CIP. You can see the flagpole on there, new vans, stage curtain, stockade fence, all of those things that also enhance our how many acres of 88 acres of what am I looking for? Property, that's what I'm looking for. Our 88 acres of property. So I just want to make sure that we consider that too. And I do know, and there's a note at the top of your page 42, that these are just, we're not asking you to pick from the list. We're not asking you to say, hey, fight for something on the list. It's solely intentional, is for you to be able to have this informational purposes of what have our administrators said is needed in our buildings, and what are we now kicking the can down the road, that's not meeting students' needs in the future.
Question.
Yeah.
You have 9 on there for bar stipends. Does that mean that the teachers who are currently using that program are not getting paid anything extra for that
We
program?
don't have any meetings outside the contractual day. All of our meetings are held during their contractual hours.
What kind of meetings might be held outside of contractual hours?
We were looking to move some of those meetings that are held during contractual hours, so that teachers have time to do their planning for their next classes versus us taking up their time or using that time to do the meetings that are required by the bar program.
And how often would something like that be needed?
There's meetings weekly in each one of our schools. Yeah, we've got big block and small block is what we call them.
What's a ordinary meeting length of time?
Typically down to 30 minutes, down to maybe 40, up to 45 or 60 minutes. But typically it's the 30 to 40 because that's what teachers have for their planning periods. And that's when their students are at specials like music or PE.
And how many teachers are involved in that?
All of our teachers are involved in bar. That includes our classroom
That's what I'm
teachers,
asking.
our school counselors.
Do you have a number?
How many classroom teachers do we have? Ooh, I have to look back at our list here.
Are you talking about overall or in a particular meeting? How many?
Overall, how many?
We have 48 teachers at PRHS. It's on page 7 of your booklet. 22 at Whittier, 24 at Elm Street, 18 at MCS, and 36 at PCS.
If you're able to, Paula, Monday night at our board meeting and the recording online, Caitlin presented about this and how they do it at Minot and what the meetings are like and what they talk about and who's involved and how students are identified to become part of that. And then whether they get escalated up or down and how much time is spent. She gave us a whole thing about it.
Presentation?
Yep.
Well, if I ever get my internet.
I understand.
Thank you.
I think also part of sharing this with you and the rest of the information is so that you've got the story. If somebody asks you, is there fluff? There isn't any fluff in this budget. I mean, and we've taken out things that were not even fluff. They're needs that aren't going to be met, or
Typically, we would have taken this list as an A team, and I think most of you know this, but Paula, just letting you know, usually as an A team, we would take this list and then we would talk about that and prioritize 2 or 3 to 4 positions to bring forward to this budget committee to be added into our budget, but we're not doing that this year. And as Larry said, this just provides you that bigger picture of what the conversations were behind doors, right? Like,
Well, I guess my line of thought was, well, if you have this program running and you need this time, then how are these teachers getting what they need in order to make this program run appropriately and function to its best capacity?
yep, and we can ask that question for a lot of those too, like, providing intervention for kids, like how are we making sure kids are getting what they need to close their learning gap so they can actually access their grade level curriculum. So we use our Wednesday early release time for a lot of those components. So on Wednesdays, we do have an hour early release from both our middle school, high school, and then our elementary schools are also released. And so we do use a lot of that time to be able to hold a lot of these meetings and trainings and provide extra for our teachers, but we also want to be able to give them time in their classrooms too, to prepare.
So this is kind of the balance that we talked about, the picture that has the balance. John talked about the things that we need that in facilities that we're just not going to be able to do next year. And that slide was sort of the balance to it instructionally, what we're not going to be able to add to the learning environment. So,
So John's on the
back
left,
to that.
Amy's on the right.
we could put some names on it. but-
Yeah.
Pictures, just put pictures.
I will update that.
No
Have a lot of bake sales.
I have
A lot of bake sales.
a silly question. What is 2/5 of a counselor? Is that like a head in a jar or?
Well, and that was my, yeah,
It's 2
I
days
was
a week.
wondering that.
Okay, all right. I want to see 2/5 of a person.
Me too.
Anything else, Amy? You good? I like this slide, Amy, put this one together, and I just like it. It's, if you find yourself in a hole, you gotta stop digging, and that's what I think we've been doing. We've been in a hole, you just keep digging that hole deeper and deeper. I think that bottom line captures it all with we have to pause in the adversity we're facing and follow a different course of action, which we've done through this meeting. But this budget season is a different one. Someone mentioned over here next year, it was you, I don't know, one of you mentioned budget next year. As we move forward, yeah, someone said, we'll get any better next year or something. Someone made a comment over there. You're looking at, this is what we're looking at as we move forward. You got the master lease purchase, which we figured in about 500. You've got LRTC, which is the tech center is going to start charging. There's been an overcost for that program, but Lewiston has been absorbing it in their ESSER funds. And this year, they're actually going to absorb it in their local budget. But they are going to start charging per seat. So that's another 41K, and that will be coming forward.
How many do we have involved in that?
50 some.
And there's always a wait list.
Yeah,
I think our spots are 50.
we fill the spots, whatever spots we have. I'm thinking 60 or close.
Might be somewhere in there.
So that, there's your state mandated Family Medical Leave Act that Stacy likes so much, the 95K. Amy's mentioned the curriculum and math. We need a math program. That's 100K. John's 600K for CIP. I guess it's not John's, it's the district's 600,000 for CIP. And NEAS, that's a 1-year cost, but Eric mentioned that, you heard him mention that with the accreditation process. That's gonna have to be built in for next, for fiscal year 26, the 10,000. So unless something happens with subsidy down the road. And property valuation. So that is, you have all the information. I know that we were asked to go back and talk to Joe about a couple of her line items. That's the only thing I have right now as far as guidance from this group. We are scheduled to meet again after the break. I would like to bring the A-team up to speed if there's any other directives that you give us, and be my first time here, I'm not sure, do we usually leave this meeting with,
If there are,
go do this, this, and this?
and I would have us look back at what we filled out today as we've gone through this meeting in terms of strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and have you look at that and how do we want to proceed in terms of next steps? Stacy's talked to us about the tax impact, and we all know that that's going to drive where we head next too. So whether the proposal that has been made is one that we just want to sit down and have a few questions about and refine, or is the direction that this group is going to give to the superintendent that there needs to be further cuts? And if there needs to be further cuts, I think from hopefully what you've seen today is the only place we really have to make that is in people and programs. So I guess that's what we need to have some discussion about, because if we are looking at doing further cuts, because the information that we've gained today says to us this is not a budget that we can comfortably put before our voters with some confidence that it will get passed, then we need to look at it again, and we need to give the superintendent some guidance on where to go with that, so he can go back to the people, our administrators, and say, this is the direction that we need to go before our meeting on the 24th.
Can I ask a question about ed techs? I know that has been an area that you have struggled in the past couple of years to fill a lot of the open positions, and none of the positions that you eliminated were ed techs that were not filled. Does that mean you chose to keep them in the budget, or you filled them all?
We removed some open ed tech.
We did, from special ed, we removed 3.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't see that because it was done prior to the budget, but we did do.
Okay.
Joe came to us and offered up 3.
Well, speaking from the poor child in the neighborhood with a lot of elderly people, and just having gone through a full evaluation, my opinion is that the residents of Mechanic Falls are gonna have a very hard time buying this. With the fixed income, the level of fixed income in our community. Especially adding as much as potentially 8.9 per mil. There's no way. There's no way. In my opinion. I'm just one person, that's my opinion.
That's why you're here.
Paula, what do you think, your neighbors and would support right now? Mechanic Falls?
Closing all the schools. No, seriously, Mechanic Falls, closing all the schools, that would make them happy.
That's not beautiful.
Okay, well, then, yeah.
I
wanna say no to that.
I don't think.
That's a hard pass.
I don't think it's that drastic. My block alone, Standpipe Road. I have 3 widowers that live on it. And 3 other families that are in their 70s or 80s. That's just my block. So they grew up in a different time era. You went to school for reading, writing, arithmetic. You didn't go to play football. You didn't go for chess. Field trips, what were field trips? So, I know a particular couple but you, Miss Martin, who I'm gonna be asked questions by sometime the next day or 2 because they knew I was here, and I can't imagine, I just can't imagine, the Patty Fredericks, she's a Vietnam veteran widow. Earl, Sheila Bossy, whose husband died of a heart attack. And had a conversation with her going, oh my God, I can't believe they're saying my house is worth this much. It's not worth as much, kind of a thing. And it's just in my little neighborhood.
So speaking to that, how does like reeval work? I know like the average is towns do it every 10 years, but obviously this is astronomical. I mean, Poland went up over 100 mil, you know, so like, how does that work?
And that was just a stopgap measure, that wasn't a full reevaluation. We have it in our budget to, and it's years out, it takes a while to even just get someone in that has availability to do a large scale reevaluation. So, we're slated for this to hit in Poland in 2027 for fiscal year 2028. So that's when you'll really see the full effect of that. What's really gonna hurt people and what's been a repeating concern is that there was that, bill that, sort of,
For seniors.
for
yeah.
seniors,
Yeah.
right? And then they took it away. And so for those seniors, they're gonna see kind of a double increase. So they're not only gonna see this year's increase, but they're gonna get hit, like play catch up for last year's, in a
That-
sense. So,
That was what was happening with Poland, right? The town? of-
no, this is.
Oh, the whole
every
state.
whole
State.
Every
Yeah.
state.
The whole state. They
Good
added the
afternoon,
program.
Wildcats. At this time, can I
So,
please get Walker?
Where, say, in Poland, they saw an increase of 11%, or everybody saw an increase in 11% this previous year. The seniors didn't see that, but say there's a 15% or 20% increase, they're gonna get that plus the 11.
Yeah, and that's gonna happen on all three of our towns. I got that, benefit. And so next year, my taxes this year were exactly what they were last year, even though the people around me might have gone up. So next year, I'm gonna get that increase. And so, which is right, for senior citizens, it's gonna be kind of a double whammy.
And in Poland, there's roughly half of our community that own their homes and so that are on, fixed incomes. So this sort of thing does hurt. I mean, me personally, it's easy to, I'm all for it and I want to support it and I can afford it. But for a lot of the community members, this is going to be a tough pill to swallow. I think the only recourse that you could take to cut the budget is to cut positions. I think that's kind of a common theme, and I know I personally wouldn't like that, and I know you all wouldn't like to see that either. But might be the only area, right, that you could potentially look at. I think the buildings, we gotta fix them. That's just kind of my thoughts, what I'm hearing in the town.
I'm just curious, so like looking at those numbers, like I can't find them right now, but like the 251 per 100,000 for Poland and all of those numbers, is it this $1.9 million difference that's, like, I guess my question is, how much would have to be cut out of the budget to make that number zero? Not that I want that, but like, what are people asking for here? Because like, you can't be upset about $250 per 100,000 and then say, let's cut 2 positions. Like, that's not even gonna be a drop in the bucket. So like, if we're talking about making cuts to affect this, like, it would be so drastic. I don't even think.
It would sound
examples, right?
That's
Yeah,
so
it'd be like
feels-
$1 million, like,
Yeah.
or 750,000 to offset just the,
So if you look at that
Evaluation
revenue
fund.
page.
Yep.
That top number, the local revenue of 508,000.
Yep.
We can't cut that, because if we reduce that, we lose state subsidy.
Right.
It isn't equal match. So that right off the top, we can't touch.
Okay.
If you click over the next page, that 3,446,000, that's what the increase ask is.
Okay.
And you have to back that 508,000 out. Yeah, we would do that.
$9 million.
Yeah, we
can't do it.
where would we do that?
Yeah, and that just feels like, and like speaking to like the bill for the elderly people that they're essentially like making up for last year. Like the way that I'm looking at this budget is we're making up for the past 15 or 20 years
16.
that we haven't been like getting a significant increase in our tax. Like this is like catch-up time and it stinks. Like it stinks for everybody. It's horrible for
That's how I'm
But,
gonna be positioning it, like when people approach me for concerns, and like, the can has been kicked down the road for so many years that you can't keep continuing to do that.
No,
And then
it's
people, I
irresponsible.
think, do understand that. it's just hard.
Well,
I
and
don't
one of the things I was
necessarily
curious
agree.
about, our classroom sizes are so small, and I know people love small, teacher-child ratio. Maybe we need to consider for a time making bigger classes.
But that's my point, is that even if we did that, it wouldn't make a dent in this budget. Like, even if we cut one teacher from every grade
Grade.
level, it wouldn't come close to the amount of money that we are trying to make up here. So like, we'd be hurting our kids. And like, it's difficult because you have to balance the needs of your neighbors, which are valid and important, with like the needs of our children, and like whose needs are more, like, there's not more important needs, like they're both in need. And so we can't,
Well,
at
if
the
you don't have
expense
the
of our
old
children.
folks, then you have no money to take care of the young folks.
Well, that's not what I'm saying though. I'm just saying, like, we can't take care of the elderly at the expense of the children, or the children at the expense of the elderly. We have to find a way to make a balance. We can't just say, well, let's make the class sizes, 50 students per class because of this. And we also can't say, let's have a $2 million CIP budget at the expense of the elderly people. It's like, we have to find that middle ground, and I feel like that's what we're
Well,
trying
and
to
I'm
do
not talking
here.
50. My average classroom size growing up in the county was 25 kids and a student in a classroom with one teacher. So,
We're back to the rock picture again.
Right, yeah, just replace like the staffing fund with like.
Yeah.
Students and the.
so, does anybody know if the Powerball was won? Maybe we should open my ticket.
I do want to just speak to the testament of the teachers though, because whenever you cut, and this is like Amy's passion and stuff, working closely with Minot, because that's where I'm from, but their caseload, whenever we have to shift, like even the bar meetings that happen on those contractual hours, it cuts out of what they're obligated and what they're willing to do to make the best learning environment for their kids. So a lot of those hours are at home.
Wildcats,
So everything
the
that
red
they're
bus
doing.
is here. The red bus.
Yeah. So when you take from something, it comes from somewhere. So a lot of our teachers, and I'm only speaking to mine because I know them personally, and I'm sure it's across the board, but a lot of their school life is at home. So like they cut into their family life because they're preparing for classes, or they're preparing lessons, or they're grading work, or they're making up
And I
their
understand
stuff.
that, because I live with a teacher.
Yeah.
I live with a special ed teacher. So, I understand that, but I just can't fathom what it's going to do to the elderly in all of these communities, especially Mechanic Falls, who just had 100% rebound.
I think this is where us as a community, the talk needs to be bigger about reaching out to the people above us, because our hands are being bound because of legislation.
Well, and I
that's
can
being
tell
passed.
you as a select person that this lovely deal that the state came up with hasn't paid the towns yet. We've gotten, the last I knew, 52% of what they said they were gonna pay us.
And that's why they reversed it, because they can't even afford their own.
They can't afford it, and we may not, so that's causing a downflow in that regard to how it's affecting our town budget. Our town budget, we cut pretty much every area this year.
Lisa, what do you think in terms of mine?
Well, I can't say I'm happy with, the amount of money that we're looking at, but looking at what you've done to not increase the budget really over supplies, salaries type of thing is where you need to be. I think, as you mentioned, some of this stuff is out of our hands that we have to absorb. I don't see how you can take $500,000 out of this budget. I mean, I figured this is my 6th year on this committee, and I think previous kind of focus was the people, and there wasn't a focus on the buildings. And now we're kind of like, okay, there goes that picture again, right? John's on the upper end, but so now we have to sort of say, all right, we have to put a little bit more focus on those buildings, and maybe for 2 years or 3, we have to less focus on the people that are in our school system. we can't afford to add all of your 28, whatever items back in the budget, because you're looking at another $1.5 million on that. I actually am supporting of how you've presented in its bare bone minimums here, because I don't think there's a way to go higher or if there's a way to go lower. I think we're kind of stuck with what we have. Now, what we did with our town budget this year is we actually had a warrant article that we literally asked the town to say, okay, we're taking, if you vote on it, $100,000 from undesignated, and we're moving it to offset what we think is about to hit us. So we will make that decision as selectmen to say, this big amount that we're about to get hit with, do we take $100,000 off our $582,000 to lower that debt? Now, granted, that's 1 year, and that's not gonna help us for next year, because, you know, my quick math is 3.2 million next year, which is humongous. But I don't see how we can not move forward with the bare bones minimum of what we have.
Now, see, and the town of Mechanic Falls doesn't have that option because we've already had our public hearing and passed our budget for what's gonna be warranted, and it's been put out to print. So I can't even take this back to my council and say, okay, this is what's coming. We might want to consider doing what Minot has done and take some out of our undesignated fund balance to try to counter this for the people's sake. Because our water's gone over our bridge at this point.
Paula, do you know if the town of Mechanic Falls has any art funds remaining?
No,
Ours are gone.
Yours are gone.
We've spent them.
Mechanic Falls is gone.
They're spent.
Because art is
our
their
town
equivalent of our
manager,
ESSER
our
ones.
town manager was given word that they might try to claw some of that back.
Spend it.
And so he was like, we're spending this, so we got spent.
Attention 4, 5, and 6 Wildcats. The red boxes.
It's gone, you missed it.
Can I ask a clarifying question? At one point, God, I can't keep track of where I put my notes. We were talking about it is right here. That the state subsidy was based on the school lunch forms, basically. That 751,000 that we lost, is that affected by the school lunch form
Piece of it is.
Okay.
There's several factors in the formula.
That needs to be like that needs to be the headline
Yeah.
on like every town document, like coming from us, but I think also from the towns. Like, we lost almost like $750,000 this year. And even if it's not completely because of that, it is partially because people are not filling out that form. Like, everybody needs to know that.
Well, and that was
There
one of
might
my
be-
questions, is it too late at this
I think
point
that's
to,
like,
to reach out to the parents and
Yeah.
say, we need you to do this in order to get this money?
For next year, it would be helpful. It's too late for this year.
yeah.
They
Either
begged,
these are our
they
October.
did beg.
Yeah.
You guys did beg
It's-
to get
they-
those forms
They
done.
set
yeah.
things up at like open house, it's everywhere, but like, I think if the towns can get on board with somehow promoting those forms.
There's really no, I mean, speaking from the town and the separation of the two forms of government, for lack of a better term, there's really no way for us to even know, really who they would go to.
No, of course, I'm
How
just
to-
saying, just like the promotion of, please fill out this form when you get it from your school.
Now,
Because
may I
it
make a
informs.
suggestion? Mrs. Martin, our lovely Mrs. Martin, comes to every council meeting, and she gives the council the latest and the greatest in that. Maybe that's something you could do, right, in the August meeting, in the September meeting, be your big blurb for, hey, people, please.
And the feedback, when you hear from your taxpayers and they're very concerned about these numbers, I think something that needs to be brought up in that conversation of like, I'm so sorry, this is what happened in the budget meeting. Also, something that informed this amount was this paper that needs to be.
Now, the military in me is coming out, and there's always the plan for the plan for the plan. We put this before the people, and the people shoot it down very heartily.
We have to go through the process all over again. So we would go,
We'll be
the
back here.
A team would come back together, they would do what the work we've already done to this point. This group would get back together, we'd go through this presentation again with a different budget. And then this group would decide, yes, that might meet the needs of the voters. And then we'll go back out. Neighboring district, I think, had to do it 4 times last year to get it through.
Can I ask a question that kind of just stays in this room, just because it?
Well, we're
No,
recording.
okay, well, I'll just, in lieu of saying that we have to go back and say cut staff, in lieu of that, is it possible to say, okay, instead of losing your job, would you take a 3.5% raise this year? I know you've done the collective bargaining,
They wouldn't.
they would
Yeah,
rather
I'm
lose
still
their
against that,
job,
yeah.
they would rather lose their job than to only have a 3.5% raise.
There is a reduction in force language in the contract, so the association is aware. And we also on the task force had the association president be part of that.
Okay,
because when we were going
again,
through
I'm not
school-
privy to those conversations,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if I was faced with that question, I'll work for 3.5%, not 5. Do you know what I mean?
Is there still like a shortage of finding teachers around, or would you say that there's a plethora of teachers looking for jobs these
I don't know if
days?
there's a plethora. I think we're in better shape than perhaps have been in the past, but there are districts that are still struggling. There's a shortage, I guess, to answer your question.
So I mean, if there was a reduction here, they wouldn't have any issues finding a position elsewhere.
If they went somewhere else and we got a replacement, do they get the same contract as everybody else does, or do they get a different contract?
It'd be part of this collective bargaining agreement.
Any teacher in our district goes under the same collective bargaining agreement.
And if the reduction in force is based on seniority, then Brandy, who spoke about her awesome brand new teachers that just graduated from college, those would be the least senior ones that would go, and those are the ones with the least expensive benefits and everything, so.
It wouldn't really pay.
The impact
Is it based on
is,
seniority?
That's one of the factors.
Mostly, yeah.
So
100%.
again, I don't see cutting staff as
as a solution.
it doesn't, it's not gonna get you to the bottom line of just, say we were just, if you were giving me a 7% budget, period, I'm happy. But it's the other stuff that we can't control or change that's really hurting that bottom line. I mean, every year that I've been on this committee, where we look at about $2 million every year is that new baseline. And that's what you're kind of looking at here, but you can't offset the other stuff.
What would happen if we cut sports for a year?
Oh, no, you'd have a 3-count riot on your hands.
Just ask.
Again, I don't think that gets you
There's
anywhere
something with that, then you play that game of like, then
Right.
people come out to not support the budget, so the budget doesn't pass. Because they want that added back in, but when the budget doesn't pass, you have to look to reduce, so there becomes this sort of like
Vicious
game
cycle.
Yeah.
here, really of pitting people against each other, and I just think back to the task force work and how emotional that became in the last few months, and that's why, you know, we really brought forward, Lisa, to go back to what you were saying, is a budget where I knew that we weren't bringing forward teaching and learning positions, and I said that early on to Todd, where it's like, this has to be the year where the scale does tip towards fixing our buildings, and so we've known that for a while, so, yeah, and I said, you know, for this meeting, I wanted to make sure that we had the budget, the most bare bone budget that we can present, because I didn't want to play games with you guys, like, I didn't want to be like, oh, you guys have this in here, maybe you could, those unfilled positions you could take out, because those are gonna be the conversations we have, so.
Well,
bring
the
you
town of
best
Mechanic Falls
budget we
was
can.
at 22. We did our reval, it brought more money in, and it dropped us to 14. By adding this to, if this were to pass the way it is, based on your own estimation, you're gonna take the town of Mechanic Falls back to almost 21% on these new houses per mill.
No.
Yes, they put 6.62 mils. No, so how does it work, John?
Well, what is the value of 1 mill in your community? That's what you need to know before you can determine how many mills it's gonna increase.
Right now, it's 14.
Yeah, but the 14 mills, but 1 mill equals a certain value. You know, what's your total municipal budget?
I actually have that somewhere.
I was gonna say, I can't remember, and I don't have access to the internet.
Still.
So you take the
Is that
total,
from
you take the,
SCORE?
you take the total municipal budget divided by 14, that gives you the value of 1 mil. And that will tell you, you know, so let's say 1 mil is valued at $50,000. Whatever our percentage of the increase is, whatever our dollar value is, you compare it to the 50,000. So if ours is at 75, that's going to increase your mill by 1.25. Not 7 mils.
It wouldn't go up that much.
No, that's a significant amount of money.
The 6.62
Is the state.
is the state. That's the mill expectation the state set that we have to raise locally.
Well, I
to
was
get
gonna
our
say, if you
subsidy.
do it based on the minimum that we have to raise.
But that's not yours. That's not Mechanic Falls. So on the local revenue,
Yeah.
first section of the revenue budget, Mechanic Falls has to raise $1,401,012 based on the 6.2 mils set by the state.
Is that the one we just passed? Yeah, the one we just
That's
passed?
based on the main revenue service valuation of the town of
Okay.
Mechanic Falls.
Oh, you're doing it based on what the.
Not
state
me, the
said.
state.
That's
That's
what
the
the
state-
state tells us we
Yeah.
have to use in our funding formula. I'd use a much lower number.
So with the cost formula, like, so Poland is 63.43%, are we 63.43% of that 6 dot whatever mil?
So that's
or-
something different. That's the cost sharing formula of the district that we come up with. That's the 90-10. That's where the 63% comes in. So in the debt service and the additional local,
Or the 90-10, this one is, so that percentage is on this local, only an additional local. This up here is.
And then you mentioned consensus.
Well, we were, if I understood correctly, when we came out of
It's like
the,
this,
Yeah,
this
but
is
it's-
a state cost
they
sharing
figured we were
formula,
going
and these
to have to do
are
$14.
You are?
But of that 14 dollar mill rate, some of that is the school department budget. 14 mils is not just the municipal budget. In fact, probably Mechanic Falls mills, half of those probably go to the school. So just the mills to fund just the municipal budget is probably 7. The other 7 goes to the county and the school department.
I know the county was covering some of it.
Yeah, but the county's usually a small
This was
number.
my first, yeah, it was very overwhelming, this was my second budget.
I think the county was a 9% increase across, the total budget line items that then gets dispersed by another formula to
Yeah,
each of the.
it was high.
What do you look at?
Yeah.
Could have been higher.
That's what I heard, it could have been so.
It could have been a lot higher, yeah.
14% of it.
While Stacy's looking, I think maybe we're at a point where we can maybe just get a sense of, as a committee, where we stand, so we know where we need to go next. And so one of the things we talked about this morning was the Fist to 5 and trying to see where we are in terms of consensus, because that may help us know more where we need to go for next step. So I don't know, Todd, you want to explain?
Yeah, you just put up a fist and how many fingers, and if you look up on the display I've just put up on the board, a fist is, nope, I don't want it, I can't even consider going forward, you're set, and it's not. If a 1 would be a major issue, and 2 would be a minor issue, but that would demonstrate a lack of consensus. You have to come back and have discussions if your goal is to get everybody to consensus. You may not ever get to that point, you may have to go back to the old voting method that used to happen. People that put up 3 fingers or more, minor issue, we can resolve it later, or as you said, we can't go any further either way, it's just what it is. I'm fine with it as it is, with 4, and then 5, this is awesome, and I love it.
I love it.
Many of us are gonna love this,
No.
but.
You wanna?
Yeah, so I guess, what we'd want to think about is the budget that we've looked at today, the discussions. Do we feel like we need to move forward with this? And then at our next meeting, just talk about, some clarifications and maybe the messaging and some of that. So I would say fist to five, whether you think we can move forward with this budget pretty much as it is.
Stacy?
I abstain. Okay, thank you.
Paula?
And you're saying,
Can I do this?
It's at 2.5. 2.5 would swing us into the.
I think we're.
Still a consensus.
We are gonna come in, like, Mary said, we will have to come back because, we're gonna follow up with Joe on a couple of those questions we had. There is $30,000 in there that needs to be removed, that hasn't been removed, that we already said we were gonna remove, so that'll come up. As you said, though, it's a drop in the bucket. Sorry. Stacy is gonna follow up with one last question to the state. Hopefully, maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel, but there is one question that we have that she just realized that she's gonna reach out to the state and inquire about.
And those line items where you pointed out where it was like.
644 and 652.
There was a couple more, but they were
40,000.
smaller after
Yeah.
that. Stacy, you guys confirm your benefits are at 9% increase? That's horrid.
9.9.
That's
9.9.
horrid. You
52
guys
is
are a lot
2%.
higher than other
52 is
kind of
2%.
sectors.
It's the highest we've had.
That's terrible.
It was 6 last year.
Yeah.
Paula, can you just talk a little bit about where you stand on it? On us moving forward?
As a business person, as a grandmother, and having raised children in this town, and had you as a beautiful person in my life, and I'm loving kids, I'm a kid person, you know? I understand this, and I understand where John is, and I've watched us, I've been in this town 25 years, I've watched us kick the construction stuff down the road in order to save the mill. If they'd have spent last year, probably wouldn't have had as much problems with it, but with the combinedness of them taking away the senior tax thing and the town of Mechanic Falls just having 100% evaluation, it's going to devastate individuals in my community, my matriarchs and my patriarchs, and I have a grave concern about that.
So,
Especially ones that aren't lucky enough like you and Fogg or the Dyers to have very nice pensions that they retired with.
and I think we're all with you on that, Paul. I guess my question is whether you feel we can move forward with this in terms of the consensus, or whether we need to work on this some more. I think what I've heard people say is that what we would have to cut would be devastating, for us to get to a point that it would take away the concern that you have. And I think all of us hear your
Well, and
concern
I understand that as
understand
well, and that's, at this point, I think my opinion is, it is what it is, and it should be put out, if this is the bottom bones, which it appears to be, then we need to put it out to the people and let the chips fall where they may. And if the chips fall the way that they most likely will, then we'll come back and deal with the calamity of it and the trying to figure out afterwards. That's the only logical thing I could see for how to deal with this, is let the people decide, and then we'll go from there.
I had one question, and I forgot what Rose said. What is her budget? Because I know that that's typically a separate line item that's not part of this one. What's her budget this year?
Jenny, it's,
Oh, Jenny, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. not
And
Rose,
it-
that's
it's
what I-
not an
Yeah.
increase. Her name is Jenny.
It is,
You were-
I
you were
thought
on.
it was, yeah. So what's her budget this year?
The
Because
local
she's
amount
always
is
been really,
yeah.
really.
She said it was around 300,000. The local amount that we raised is 130.
Okay,
And we raised that last year. That's what she's asking for again this year. So there's
okay.
no
So there's no
increase.
increase.
That's why
Okay.
it wasn't on the increase list.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I do have a question, general question, but this is my first year participating in this process, and does it always happen at this time of year? Can it occur earlier in the year before town budgets? Because it sounds like we've already done our town budgets, and so we can't take into consideration the school budget when we're focusing on what the town needs.
We don't get our state subsidy numbers till February, and we don't get our anthem rates until April. So, you know, we estimate, but we'd like to have real numbers by the time we do the district budget meeting, certainly. So we could, but then we're missing some crucial pieces to put our budget together with.
So what I would say in response to that is, I think having consistent people on this budget and staying fairly connected to what's going on is that person can go back and say, look, I know it's about to hit the fan. And you have a better opportunity to plan for it. When you have, other people coming and going, you lose that, because it's a learning curve, right? It's gonna take a while for you to understand all of that and then use it to your advantage as it comes. So for us, we literally put it in our budget. We put this plan together for Minot in September, well in advance of even seeing this, but I knew what was coming. Danielle knew what was coming. And so we were like, okay, we're gonna get ahead of this and try and be somewhat proactive for it, to plan against it, to try and offset what we think is going to be a very large amount.
Yeah, I think, we were discussing a round number of like about 20% increase, and it ended up being 25. But 5% is quite a variance.
Huge.
We have tried to shift our budget schedule in years past, but we got a lot of feedback from the towns that they didn't want us to change
Correct.
when we're voting. So we've shifted late to match the municipal voting in June. So all of our meetings right now are scheduled to meet that deadline, because we've tried to do it differently in the past. It was very unpopular.
Yeah, our schedules are set to meet that deadline as well.
But we also have some scheduled deadlines within the law in terms of when we have to have our votes, and they have to be so many days apart, and.
Right, our budget validation referendum, which is in June, has to be 30 days after our district budget meeting. So we have to have that in May, and so there's no point doing this stuff in January without our true numbers, and then wait until May for our meetings.
I do wanna say though, because this is my first year on this team also, but as a board member and a taxpayer, nobody ever wants taxes to go up. And I think we all share that concern, that we know people that this is gonna be detrimental to their finances and they don't have 2 pennies to rub together to pay for this. But I didn't know what to expect coming into this meeting today. I really thought, cause I'm on the ops committee also, so I've been in the thick of it with Jess and just seeing the intricacies of really what our district is facing construction-wise, this, proverbial can that we keep kicking. So I really thought it was gonna have to be coming in here fighting tooth and nail for every penny for John and the ops and just our district in general. And, and really even almost arguing with town members on we can't have this is gonna be too much. But I just wanna say that I've been pleasantly surprised with how this went, and hats off to the team, because you guys really did all the hard work. I thought I was gonna have to come in here and fight for these funds that we need. But when you say bare bone, this is about as bare bone as we can get. So, I'm actually very impressed that you guys made those hard cuts that you did, with admin and the whole A team really on taking all of this out, because you really did the hard work for us. And I know that was a painful loss for you guys, but to keep it in the benefits of the towns, I'm a taxpayer too. So this is money coming out of my pocket that I'm advocating for to spend. I think it was actually overall really well, and that would I like to see us spend more money? Sure, but do we have it? No, it's not feasible. So I just wanted to say, as a board member, a taxpayer, a mom, neighbors, this was a really good process today, and I'm proud of how we handled it as a district. And like you said, we're gonna give it to the voters, but I think it's also important that the messages we bring back, Lisa, I think you worded it beautifully, and I know you have the expertise on that, and this team did what they needed to do to cut this as low as they can. So I think it's important that when we present that to our people in our towns and our neighbors and our friends, that this isn't something that, I used the word earlier, fluff. We're not trying to get a bunch of extra stuff. We're not, trying to get all these things that we don't need. This is really a bare bone budget. Is it gonna hurt them financially? Yeah, but it's the barest that we can do without severely compromising education and facilities, so I just wanted to say.
Yeah, and I think when we meet again, that we really need to focus on, as a committee, what is that message and how are we gonna get that message out of there? Because it really is a revenue issue for us. Yes, there are increases, but it's really about the revenue that's the problem, and that's what brought us to the 20-some percent.
Now, back when my kids were kids, we used to have the equivalent of a town meeting for school board. Do they still do that?
Well, we have a public hearing.
Yeah.
We'll have we have a district meeting, and we'll certainly have that conversation. But sometimes it's who shows up at that meeting, and then also who are the people that are gonna go and vote. And so we just need to make sure that as a committee, we've got a plan to get out an accurate message, and in a variety of ways, so that our communities can understand it.
I want to thank you for the level of detail and the transparency of the numbers shared. I remember sitting in the district-wide meeting last year and, basic questions were asked about, well, how are you spending the CIP and different things? And we didn't have those answers. So I just watching like what you guys have been through and watching the school board, the Futures Task Force, like that's just been so helpful. And really appreciate this dissemination of information. And I can see you trying to include the community and include input as much as possible. I know it's been hard and, it's just not easy, but feel like you've done your due diligence and really, gone above and beyond, in my opinion. So I appreciate it.
If I could just elaborate, I just want to say why I asked to not be able to vote. Like I said at the beginning, this is the hardest budget I've ever worked on since 1980, whatever, 90, whatever. My mother-in-law she lives alone. She lost her husband. She lives in Poland. The tax bill is over $1,000 each time. I don't think she can afford an increase. But at the same token, like we've all said, this is the bare bone budget. So how do you find that balance?
And I guess we go back to what Paula says, is we're gonna have to depend on our communities to help us do that. And if it's a vote against it, then we'll be back here trying to figure out what to do.
And thank you for being tolerant with the crazy farm lady from up on the hill that's never done it.
Who's that?
Yeah, we thank you for being here, Paula, because I kind of twisted her arm a tiny bit the other night at the council meeting, but she said, no, I'll do it.
And not having any computer to
Right,
see
and I
all
think I heard
this
Lisa
stuff
say this is a lifetime commitment.
It is.
I think I heard her say she wants
It kind of
consistency,
feels
so
like it.
we will see you again.
So we will certainly welcome you back.
I'm gonna go buy a Powerball
So-
ticket.
I'll be by a couple.
So we will get answers to the questions that you've had, we'll do some refinement, in terms of talking about how to get the message out.
I gotta go start my payroll. I gotta get back
I gotta
to
go.
it.
So thank you all,
I hope she's
appreciate it.
happy to go back.
Well, Hudson was.
Take some food.
Yes, take some food.
No, I'm telling you guys.
Jess, you have.
Oh, I can take you home.
Oh, God, no, if you're not going now.
Because
I know
this is
she's
a deal.
going to marry
I'll take you home then. I'm in the pickup truck. I'm in the farm pickup.
And this video call, yeah.
I live with 2 dogs, so.